So you want to own a cement plant. You dig up limestone, burn it, grind it into gray powder, and sell the powder that holds up the modern world. Every road, every bridge, every foundation, every parking garage is made of the thing you make. Demand is guaranteed because nothing else does the job. Sounds simple. It isn't. The thing you make is nearly worthless by the ton and almost impossible to ship. Cement is so cheap and so heavy that hauling it a couple of 100 miles can cost more than a cement itself. So you do not really own a factory. You own a circle on a map, a few 100 miles across, and inside that circle, you are close to a king. Outside it, you do not exist. What it costs to get in, and why the plant is worthless without the hill behind it. Where the money comes from. Why the same wall that traps your product also protects you from every competitor on Earth. And why the man who made cement cheaper than anyone in history could never turn a profit doing it. The buy-in. Start with the count. Cement was produced at 99 plants across 34 states and Puerto Rico in a recent year. And that number barely moves because almost nobody builds a new one. That reason is buried in the ground. A plant cannot sit just anywhere. It has to fit on top of limestone because limestone is the raw material and it is far too heavy and cheap to haul in from a distance. The rule of thumb is brutal. Quarry and plant need to be under about 5 miles apart for the economics to work at all. So you are not really buying a factory. You are buying a hill of the right kind of rock with a factory bolted to the side of it and a fixed number of years of stone left inside that hill. That is why these plants change hands as companies, not buildings. The industry is held by a handful of giants. Holcim, Cemex, Heidelberg Materials, CRH, Buzzy. To get in at scale, you buy one of them or a piece of one. In 2025, CRH agreed to acquire a cement materials business for about $2.1 billion. That is the real price of entry at the top. Billions for an existing position on ground somebody already secured. Now the cost of building new, when it happens at all. A cement plant is one of the most capital-heavy factories anywhere. A large new line runs into the high hundreds of millions, and a full greenfield plant can pass $1 billion. One kiln alone, the giant rotating tube at the heart of it, is a length of steel the size of a football field or more, lined with special brick, turning day and night past 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. And here is the strange part, the one that runs against every instinct. You would think a product this essential in a country this large would be made close to wherever it is needed. It is not. In a recent year, the United States imported about 24% of all the cement it used. Nearly a quarter of American cement now arrives by ship, because in many coastal markets, it is cheaper to bring cement across an ocean than to truck it from a plant a few 100 miles inland. Sit with that. It can be cheaper to move cement 3,000 miles by water than 200 miles by road. That one fact is the key to this whole business, and the rest of the episode is built on it. What you inherit. You inherit a quarry with a number on it, and the number only goes down. Every plant is drawing down a fixed reserve of limestone in the hill beside it. Every ton you sell is a ton of hill gone forever. A good site has decades of reserves. A tired one is measured in years. When the rock runs out, or only the expensive rock is left, the plant does not relocate. It dies. You inherit whatever is in that hill, and not 1 ton more. You inherit a kiln that must never really stop. That giant tube is lined with refractory brick and held at enormous heat. You bring it up to temperature slowly, over days, cool it down, and the lining can crack. And you are looking at a shutdown measured in weeks and a repair measured in millions. The kiln wants to run for months or years at a stretch, and your whole operation exists to keep it fed. You inherit an emissions profile unlike almost anything else in industry. Making cement releases an extraordinary amount of carbon dioxide, and not only from the fuel. The chemistry itself, the burning of limestone, releases carbon as a matter of physics. 1 ton of cement releases very roughly 9/10 of a ton of carbon dioxide. And the industry accounts for something on the order of 7 to 8% of all human carbon emissions worldwide. Whatever direction carbon policy takes, you hold one of the most exposed assets in the economy, and you inherit that circle, the freight wall. Your delivered price rises with every mile, and rises fast, because the product is so cheap for its weight. Your natural market is the ground close to the plant, and the moment a customer sits closer to a rival plant or a port, you lose them, not on quality, but on shipping. You inherit a territory whose edges you did not draw. They are set by diesel and distance. So, before you sell a single bag, you have inherited a hill that is shrinking, a fire you cannot put out, a carbon bill the world is only going to tighten, and a market whose borders are drawn by the cost of a truck. Now, where does the money come from? The revenue layers. Number 1. Bulk cement, sold by the ton, close to home. Average mill value in the United States has run around $150 to $160 a ton in recent years, and some measures put it higher. Most of it never reaches a builder in a bag. Somewhere between 70 and 75% goes to ready-mixed concrete producers, the companies with the spinning drum trucks. Another 12% or so goes to makers of concrete products like pipe and block. You are mostly a supplier to other manufacturers, not to the public. Number 2. Bagged cement at a premium. That same gray powder, put in a paper bag and sold to contractors and homeowners, fetches far more per ton than bulk. Single 94-pound bag can retail from around $12 to $40, depending on region and type. Small share of volume, fat share of margin. Number 3. Going downstream into concrete itself. Here is where the smart money sits. The giants do not only sell cement. They own the ready-mix concrete plants and the aggregate quarries too, capturing margin all the way from the rock to the truck that pours your driveway. When 3/4 of your cement goes to ready-mix anyway, owning that ready-mix operation means selling to yourself and keeping both margins. Number 4. The import terminal, which is a business disguised as a defense. Because 1/4 of American cement arrives by sea, whoever owns the coastal terminals that receive it controls a choke point. A grinding station or import terminal on the coast lets a producer serve markets its inland kilns could never reach and hedge against its own plants running short. Port is a second front door. And number 5, the strangest asset of all, the wall itself. Being the only plant inside a freight radius is not a product you sell. It is a position you hold, and it can be worth more than any single line on the ledger. Hold that thought, because it is about to become the whole story. Listen to that again. Go back to that fact from the buy-in. It can be cheaper to ship cement 3,000 miles across an ocean than to truck it 200 miles overland. Here is the arithmetic underneath it. Studies of the American market put the cost of moving cement overland at roughly 42 cents per ton mile. Loading it onto a barge or ship costs a fixed amount up front, but then the water miles are astonishingly cheap. So over long distances, water wins in a landslide, and over land, distance is a killer. Run it on a single ton. At around 40 cents a ton mile, hauling 1 ton of cement 200 miles by road adds roughly $80 of freight to a product that left the plant worth maybe $150. You have added more than half again to the price just by driving it 200 miles. Listen to that again. Drive cement 200 miles, and you can double its delivered cost. Now see what that does to competition. If your rival's plant is 300 miles away, their cement arrives at your customer's door so loaded with freight, it cannot compete with yours, no matter how efficient their kiln is. And your cement, sent the other way, cannot compete with theirs. Neither of you can invade. The freight wall works in both directions at once. That is why economists who study this industry find the vast majority of cement is sold locally. In one detailed model of the United States market, around 89% of shipments moved overland, over short distances, close to the plant. Each plant sits at the center of its own little kingdom, and the walls are built out of nothing but the cost of a truck. So the single most valuable thing you can own in this business is not the best kiln or the cheapest fuel. It is the only plant inside a circle. The freight that traps your product inside your territory is the exact same freight that keeps every competitor out of it. Which raises the obvious question: if every plant is a little monopoly, why does anyone ever lose money making cement? Now, let's look at the bill. The ledger. Start with the line that gives this industry its nickname. Cement men call their business burning money, and they are not being poetic. Fuel and power. To turn limestone into cement, you heat it past 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit, millions of tons a year. That heat comes from burning coal, petroleum coke, natural gas, and increasingly whatever else burns. Old tires, waste solvents, ground up trash. Energy is commonly around a third of the total cost, and in a bad year, higher. When people say fuel is half the cost, they are rounding up, but not by as much as you would hope. Then electricity, on top of the fuel. Grinding rock into powder, twice, once before the kiln and once after, takes enormous amounts of power. Cement plant is one of the larger electricity customers in its region, and rising power prices, driven lately even by data center demand, push straight into this line. Next, the kiln itself. As a maintenance object, that giant tube is lined with refractory brick that wears out in the heat and must be replaced. The steel shell, the rollers it turns on, the preheater tower, the crushers and mills, all of it runs under constant thermal and mechanical stress. Maintenance never really stops, and a major kiln reline is a 7-figure event that also costs you every ton you did not make while it was cold. Next, the quarry and moving mountains. You are running a mine as well as a factory. Drilling, blasting, and hauling millions of tons of rock a year, with the fleet of enormous trucks and crushers that implies. Cheap per ton next to the burning, but it never stops, because the kiln is always hungry. Next, carbon, which is turning from a footnote into a headline. Cement responsible for the better part of 1/10 of global carbon emissions, and roughly 9/10 of a ton of carbon dioxide leaving the plant for every ton made. Carbon is the fastest growing line in this ledger. In parts of the world, a carbon price already lands directly on cement. Wherever your plant sits, the long-run direction of this cost is one way, and it is up. Next, freight, the cost that defines your whole market. Every mile of delivery eats margin, which is why plants fight so hard to serve only the ground closest to them. And finally, the ordinary weight of a giant industrial site. Labor, insurance, property tax, environmental compliance, and depreciation on a plant that costs the better part of $1 billion and will need heavy reinvestment to keep running. Add it together, and you have enormous fixed costs, a punishing energy bill, a growing carbon liability, and a product it cannot afford to ship. Which sets up a trap with 2 jaws. The trap. First jaw. The kiln cannot stop, but the market it serves can vanish. A cement plant is built to run flat out, because the kiln is happiest hot and running, and miserable stopping and starting. Your costs are overwhelmingly fixed. The rock, the kiln, the debt, the crew, they cost about the same whether you sell every ton or half of it. To make money, you have to run near full and sell near everything. Now, the second jaw. You cannot ship your way out of a local slump. If demand collapses inside your circle, you cannot just send the cement somewhere busier, because the freight wall that protects you also imprisons you. The wall that keeps competitors out keeps your product in. A plant in a dying market cannot rescue itself by selling into a booming one 300 miles away. The trucks eat the difference. Put the 2 jaws together, and you get the defining disaster of this industry. A machine that must run flat out, selling into one local market it cannot leave. In a business tied completely to construction, the most violently cyclical demand on Earth. And this is not theory. Watch what happened to the whole American industry in living memory. In 2005 and 2006, at the peak of the housing boom, the United States was consuming around 122 to 131 million tons of cement a year. Every plant ran hot. Everyone was expanding. New capacity was on order. Then construction fell off a cliff. By 2009 and 2010, American consumption had collapsed to around 67 to 68 million tons. Nearly half the market gone in about 4 years. Capacity utilization fell to about 67%. Meaning a third of the nation's kilns stood effectively idle. And it was worse in the boom states. the exact places that expanded hardest. Consumption fell about 69% in Arizona, 68% in Florida, 68% in Nevada, 61% in Georgia, 60% in California. Plants that had just spent hundreds of millions adding capacity were staring at markets that had shrunk by 2/3, with nowhere to send the cement. Here is the trap in one sentence. You own a machine that must run flat out, chained to one local market it cannot leave, in the single most cyclical industry there is. The man who understood this business better than anyone fell straight into that trap, and he was one of the most famous inventors who ever lived. The history digression. The name comes first. In 1824, an English bricklayer named Joseph Aspdin patented a way to make artificial stone by burning limestone and clay together and grinding the result. He called it Portland cement because the hardened product resembled the prized building stone quarried on the Isle of Portland. Every bag of ordinary cement on Earth still carries that name. But the story that belongs in your ledger is Thomas Edison's. Around 1899, fresh off a costly failure trying to mine and mill iron ore, Edison found himself with mountains of waste sand and a lot of rock-crushing gear. He noticed the sand made good cement, and with the restless confidence of a man who had already electrified the world, he founded the Edison Portland Cement Company in New Jersey. Edison did what Edison always did. He attacked the technology. The kilns of his day were short, around 60 to 70 feet, pouring a couple of hundred barrels a day each. Edison built kilns 150 feet long, the longest in the world, more than 5 times the output. By 1907, his kilns could pour 1,100 barrels a day each, and his complex was among the largest cement operations in the world. He took out nearly 50 cement patents. Then watch what his own genius did to him. Edison licensed that long kiln to everyone. It was so much more efficient that the whole industry adopted it, and cement production surged. The market filled with cheap cement, his own kilns included. He had personally made the product so much cheaper to make that the entire industry drowned in oversupply, and his own company ran at a loss year after year, from about 1902 to 1910, and struggled for most of its life. He kept pushing. He designed a system to cast an entire house, walls, roof, stairs, even the bathtub, from a single continuous pour of concrete, to give working families a cheap, fireproof home. Those molds were monstrous, something like 500,000 pounds of iron to cast one house. A handful were built. Almost nobody wanted to live in a poured concrete house that advertised how cheap it was, and the idea failed. For decades, the company limped along. What finally pulled it into the black, briefly, was one enormous order. In 1922 and 23, Edison Portland Cement supplied the concrete for the original Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. 45,000 barrels of cement went into the house that Ruth built, and Edison's concrete was so hard that when the stadium was renovated 50 years later, the city left the original structure untouched. But one stadium could not fix the underlying problem. The company went bankrupt during the Great Depression and shut down in the early 1930s. Understand what that teaches. Edison did not fail because his cement was bad. It was superb. He failed because he was too good at the one thing that destroys this industry. He made the product cheaper and more plentiful. And in a business where everyone is trapped selling into a fixed local market, cheaper and more plentiful is exactly how everyone goes broke together. The death spiral case. You have already seen the death spiral because it happened to the entire country at once between 2006 and 2010. Now walk it as a single plant would have lived it because thousands did. Start at the top of the boom. It is 2005. Your plant sits in Arizona or Florida or the California interior in a market that cannot get enough cement. Homes go up faster than anyone can pour foundations. Your kiln runs flat out. You sell every ton, and the delivered price is strong because local demand is outrunning local supply. So you do the rational thing. You borrow hundreds of millions and add a new kiln line to catch more of this obviously permanent boom. Now the market turns. Housing starts fall in 2006, then crater in 2008 and 2009. Inside your circle, customers stop building. Local demand does not soften. It falls by 2/3. and both jaws close at once. You cannot ship the surplus to a healthier market because the freight wall makes your cement uncompetitive the moment it travels far. And you cannot cheaply idle the plant because the kiln hates stopping, and your costs are fixed, whether it runs or not. So you run a plant built for a market that no longer exists, in a region where consumption has fallen 68%, bleeding money on every ton, with a fresh mountain of debt from the expansion you just finished. Multiply that by an industry. A third of all cement-making capacity fell idle. Utilization dropped to 67%. Imports, which had supplied a quarter of the country at the peak, collapsed as domestic plants fought for what demand was left. Plants were shut, mothballed, and in some cases, never restarted. Notice what killed those plants. Not a bad product. Not a weak kiln. Not poor management, in most cases. What killed them was the two-part nature of the asset itself. A machine that must run flat out, married to one local market that could disappear, in an industry chained to the most cyclical demand in the economy. The features that make a cement plant a local monopoly in good times make it a local prisoner in bad ones. The survivors. Habit 1. Own decades of rock. The plants that last sit on limestone reserves measured in decades, not years, so they never face the slow death of the good stone running out. Reserves are the first thing a serious buyer checks, and the last thing an amateur thinks about. Habit 2. Own the whole chain, from quarry to truck. The survivors are vertically integrated. They own the cement plant, the aggregate quarries, and the ready-mix operations, capturing margin at every step and never at the mercy of a single price. And 3/4 of your cement goes to ready-mix anyway, owning that ready-mix business turns a customer into a captive market. Habit 3. Hold the coast. Because a quarter of American cement now arrives by sea, a grinding station or import terminal on the coast is both a growth lever and an insurance policy. It lets a producer serve markets its kilns cannot reach and ride out its own outages. In a business defined by the cost of distance, owning the cheapest long-distance mover, water, is a genuine moat. Habit 4. Cut the fuel bill with garbage. The most efficient operators have turned their kilns into disposal machines, burning tires, solvents, and municipal waste as fuel, often being paid to take it in. In a business where energy is a third of the cost, a plant that gets paid to fuel itself has a permanent edge over one buying coal at market. Habit 5. Respect the cycle you cannot escape. The operators who survive the busts are the ones who did not overbuild in the booms. They keep debt low enough to endure a market falling by half. Because here, a market falling by half is not a tail risk. It has already happened in living memory to everyone at once. The verdict. Does this actually work? Run the years on a model plant. Call it 1.5 million tons of cement a year. A solid mid-sized operation, selling mostly bulk to ready-mix producers inside its own region. Good year. Construction in your circle is strong. The kiln runs near full, and you are getting something like $160 a ton. 1.5 million tons at those levels is roughly $240 million of revenue. And because you are the only plant inside your freight radius, you get that price without a serious local rival. Kiln full, fuel behaving. This is a wonderful business. A local monopoly on a product the world cannot do without. Now be honest about what eats it. Fuel and power first, close to a third of the cost, and volatile. Then kiln maintenance, the quarry, the growing carbon liability, freight, and depreciation on a plant worth most of $1 billion. In a full year, plenty is left. That is the appeal, and it is real. Bad year. Construction in your circle rolls over. Local demand falls, not by a little, by a third or a half, the way it did after 2006. Your price sags because every plant in the region is chasing the same shrieking pile of orders, and you cannot ship the surplus anywhere better because the freight wall holds it in. Your costs barely move because they are fixed. The kiln still needs maintaining. The debt still needs serving. And idling the plant to stop the bleeding risks the lining and hands your local ground to a competitor who kept running. That is the whole shape of it. In the good years, the freight wall makes you a king inside your circle. In the bad years, The same wall locks you inside a market that has collapsed, with a machine you cannot switch off and a product you cannot send away. You never owned a cement plant. You owned a circle on a map, and the wall around it was built out of the cost of a truck. That wall made you a king when the circle was full, and a prisoner the day it emptied.